Hello knitters! Barbara Benson here. I am an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. Make sure to check in the description below where you will find links to all of my online shenanigans, including how to get my patterns to knit up for yourself, how to join the Watch Barbara Knit Facebook group, and how to support me on Patreon. Today, I am going to be talking about self-striping yarns. I'm pretty sure you probably could have guessed that. After last week's book review of the Knit Happy with Self-Striping Yarns, I decided it might be a good idea to talk about exactly what self-striping yarns are and how they differ from gradient style yarns. And also there's something called a self-patterning yarn. And so today, when I went to work, I actually raided work and borrowed some varieties of yarn to show y'all some examples. I will be returning this yarn very shortly, so if you like any of it, it will be there. And I borrowed this leg. I borrowed this leg so that I could show y'all this is a sock knit with self-striping yarn. And what what self-striping yarn means is that this patterning was dyed into the yarn. You're not changing yarns. You're not running two balls of yarns with different colors. This is just one skein of yarn that's being knit. And one place you can really see is here on the heel. You see how skinny this stripe gets? It's because all the blue is there. That's where all the blue has landed. Because when you're doing and working with self-striping, the stripes are dyed to be a very specific width based on your sort of generic stitch count and gauge in a sock. And that's why the striping is predictable, because it's, you know, socks don't vary that much. But if you're going to be knitting a bigger sock, the stripes are going to be a little bit skinnier. If you knit a smaller sock, the stripes are going to be a little bit fatter. But you can really see here on the heel where it started going in, and here's the orange stripe. So the entire orange stripe was taken up by this heel and then the flap. But it still looks super, super cool. I like them. They're fun. Not a huge sock fan, though. I mean, I like socks as an idea, and I love looking at them, and they're beautiful, but I don't like knitting socks, which is why I wanted to share that book with you, which was the Knit Happy with Self-Striping Sock Yarn. Let me put this foot down because I really cannot take myself seriously, and I distract myself with it. I keep looking at the monitor. So I have videoed up close with my hand so you can really see what I'm talking about. And what it is what is a self-striping yarn, what is a gradient yarn, and then also throwing in a curveball with self-patterning yarns, which are sort of a variant of self-striping yarns. But one thing I can pretty much say is, if you're trying to decide if a yarn is self-striping, look at the packaging. Does it say self-striping yarn? If it doesn't say self-striping yarn or doesn't have a picture of the stripes, it's probably not self-striping yarn. Because self-striping yarn is actually a lot more time consuming to dye, especially by hand dyers, and they charge more for it, and they're going to really advertise that it is self-striping yarn. If it doesn't say self-striping yarn on it, more likely than not, it's just a variegated yarn. And I'd say just a variegated yarn. Variegated yarn is awesome, but it's not necessarily going to predictably knit up into stripes. Unless you get into planned pooling, which is a whole nother topic. So let's go and take a look at the samples of yarn that I brought to show you. This is the Slippery Cowl from the Knit Happy with Self-Striping Yarn book I talked about. And if you look over here, it says fingering weight yarn, Quere fibers, and the sample shown in Happy Go Lucky. Now, we happen to have the Querré fibers at the store. The color we have, though, is chromatic. So it's different colors, but this is what the self-striping yarn is going to look like in a skein. Now, this has been reskeined from how it was originally dyed. So you just have to trust that it is self-striping the way they say it is. But so what ends up is this came from something that looked like this with just a different color palette. Okay? Here's a couple more pictures of it. It's really cool. And so here, that is what that skein would have looked like. Other self-striping yarns are going to look different. This is the Zauberball. This is the cotton Zauberball specific, and it's from Schoppel. It's German, and you can see it's wound really pretty, and honestly, the ball itself is gorgeous. And they, on their tag, show you the colors that the yarn moves through. And by looking at it, it's not really self-striping yarn. This is more of a gradient yarn. And that's what I wanted to show y'all with this video. The difference between a self-striping, a gradient, and a self-patterning yarn. So what it is this is going to run over the course of this yarn through these colors. Now, it might repeat through these colors several times, but it's not necessarily going to show up in a specific stripe unless you're knitting at just the right stitch count. And it is super cool. You can see as it goes in, it goes pink, and then you can see there's blue in the middle. If you look real careful, you can see there's blue in the middle. So it definitely does repeat through its color run. So it goes from the blue through the blue through the pink, until you've run through all of your yarn. So it probably is going to stripe, and the book has instructions on how to figure out. So that's one really great thing about this new book, is it's going to figure out how to figure out how your striping is going to work out. So that is an example of a self-striping yarn. So it is not a gradient. I was suspicious, but I definitely think this is going to be a self-striping. But this, I 100% know, is a gradient yarn. This is Concentric by Haiku, and it's a 100% alpaca, and you can see that it goes from one color and moves through multiple shades of blue until you hit the other end, which is here. So you can either center pull and start dark and move to light, or outside pull and start light and move to dark. But that is really what a gradient is. A gradient is something that moves through a color palette and doesn't ever really repeat, and it's going to gradually shift from one color to another, as opposed to having sharp and distinct stripes, which kind of makes me feel that this is more sort of in between a gradient, because as you can see, it is a gradual color shift. So it's kind of a striping gradient. Who knows? But it's just understanding and looking at it and seeing how it's going to behave. This is not probably going to have as distinct of stripes as a self-striping yarn is going to have. It's still cool and interesting and can be used for really neat techniques, but there is a difference between a gradient and a self-striping. Now, I have these examples. So this is Unique Sock from Earth, and this is, let's see what the name of this one is. I gotta open it. This is also Unique from Earth, and they're pretty much the same product. It's just that this one is specifically it has 2 balls in it, as you can see, and so they're wound up so you can get striped socks that match exactly, so because the colors start in the same place. So this is the Unique Sock kit that comes with the balls already wound into 2, so you can very specifically make socks with this. And this is just one whole ball, but it is still a self-striping, and you can see it very specifically says self-striping. If it's going to be self-striping, it's going to say self-striping, because it's probably going to be substantially more expensive because it is harder to dye self-striping yarn. So what this is going to do is move through a progression of colors, and I have for you right here, I've probably already shown it to you in my intro, but here, see, this is what it does. It stripes all by itself. I'm bumping the thing because it's hard to get in, so I'm going to show it. I'll probably show it to you when I'm, but it's a leg. See, the stripes, it stripes itself. It runs through the colors and it has stripes. You're not changing yarns. You're not knitting like manual stripes with 2 different yarns. You're just knitted stripes. It's so cool. Self-striping yarn. So what we've shown you is self-striping. Self-striping. This has not been rewound because you can see all the colors are in chunks. This one's definitely been rewound because our colors are kind of all mixed up, versus gradient. So this is sort of a hybrid because it's going to repeat, but I'm gonna go with this being more of a gradient because of the gradual changes between colors as opposed to sharp stripes. These are gradients. Now, if you like the idea of a gradient, you can also build this kit. This is a kit that's already, you can find colors. So this is mini skeins, right? And they specifically are shifting. So you've got gray with a little purple, pink, and so it shifts through different colors, but the gray ties it all together. And so you're going to get a gradient effect. Or you can find different skeins that just subtly progress from color to color. And if you stripe them as you're changing colors, so stop before you've run out of the yarn, stop like regular before you've run out of the yarn, and bring in your second color and knit them back and forth, like knit a stripe of this and knit a stripe of this and knit a stripe of this. You'll blend them, and that's what they call, quote unquote, fading your yarn. But it's not a difficult technique, and if y'all want a video on it, I will totally do that. Let me know. But you can use mini skeins or full-size skeins to create your own gradient. You just have to weave in ends. Same thing with stripes. So, you know, instead of self-striping, you can just get a whole bunch of mini skeins and knit a whole bunch of stripes, and you've got stripes. Just knit. But, you know, it takes more math and everything. But pretty much almost anything you can do with self-striping, you can use a mini skein set to fake it, I guess I'd say. But then the last thing I wanted to show you is this. Well, not the very last thing. So this is definitely a self-striping yarn. This is a self-striping sock yarn. The picture shows you how it's going to work. This is specifically a product called Perfect so that your stripes line out perfectly. And what happens is in the middle of this skein, you've got this bright yellow that tells you when to stop your sock, and then you'll cut off this bright yellow, and then you'll start your sock at the other end of this bright yellow so that both your socks start at the exact same spot. So this, if you wanted to try to use this for some of these self-striping patterns, you're going to have this weird yellow chunk right in the middle that you'll have to cut, and your colors are going to repeat. But it definitely is a self-striping yarn, and they're really cool. But this is very specifically designed for socks. But we can break rules, can't we? This is a self-patterning sock. And the difference here is you can see the stripes actually have like patterns dyed into them. So this is something that's really for socks. It is designed so this pattern is going to show up when you knit at a specific circumference with a specific stitch count. And it's not, this pattern isn't really going to show up unless you're knitting at that specific circumference with that specific stitch count and gauge. It's going to change. So this is not a self-striping yarn. This is not a gradient yarn. It is a self-patterning yarn. And they are cool. I'm not saying it's not fun, but for the book that we looked at, this would not be a good option. You could probably make this work, but just be aware of this weird little yellow bit that's going to pop out in the middle. These definitely are going to work. This was in the book, so there you go. And they did talk about subtle. You could probably use this for what's in the book. So I just wanted to show you these different self-striping, self-patterning, gradient. They're all different ways to achieve fun effects where your yarn is doing like 90% of the work for you. Hopefully that answered any questions you had or didn't know you had, or just reinforced things that you already knew about self-striping yarn, self-patterning yarn, and gradient yarns. And just wanted to suggest the whole mini skein thing. You can always fake it, and the whole fade thing to fake a gradient. There's all different ways to achieve this with all different kinds of yarn. If you do start substituting in minis or trying to create your own gradient, you are kind of taking away from the whole concept of the yarn doing most of the work for you. And that is where the self-striping and the gradients really shine, because they're doing your work. There's no extra ends to weave in and things like that. If you don't mind weaving in ends, bust out those mini skeins or scraps or whatever you want. It's a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoyed this slightly deeper look into self-striping yarns and gradient yarns. They're a lot of fun, and I just love beautiful yarn and playing with it. If you have any more questions about this, please let me know in the comments below. We always like chatting down there, or if this makes you think of another subject that you would like to hear more on, or if there's something I briefly brushed on, you're like, hey, let's hear more of that, let me know, and that will give me, I'll put it on the list, and maybe I can work up a video on that. If you like this video, please click that like button, and if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, please subscribe to my channel and select notifications. Thank you so much.